You know, lately I've been thinking a lot about the Hollywood studio system. It's been around for well over 100 years. This year, 2023, Warner Brothers and Disney are both celebrating 100 years. And I've been thinking about the obsolescence, a lot of the self-imposed obsolescence in many ways of the Hollywood studio system. It's crazy to me that we live in an era where if somebody wants to make, say, a cartoon, you know, it used to be done through Flash. It's done through different software now, as far as I know. I think they still use parts of Flash, but I'm not an animator. I'm not. I've the closest thing artistically I've thought about doing is I did a comic strip with my friend where he did the art and I did some of the story related stuff. But I've been thinking about doing my own comic strips and trying to attempt to draw. But that's a whole nother topic for another day. As far as this Hollywood studio system, it's just crazy because it's so obsolete in the sense that you used to, if you wanted to have a cartoon or a live action show or movie, you had to go to California, you had to go to Hollywood, you had to pitch it around to these studios, hope that they would give you the time of day, and then maybe they would, maybe they wouldn't. But it costs a lot of time and a lot of money, a lot of travel expenses. But nowadays, you have direct delivery through video sharing sites like YouTube and Odyssey and Rumble and insert video hosting website here. You have that opportunity. And it's crazy to think about how this came to be almost overnight. And you gotta think that Hollywood has to be at least a little bit scared of it. In fact, I know that they're scared of it because years ago, they tried so desperately, back when YouTube had multi-channel networks, which they still do in some capacity, but back when MCNs were huge, companies like Disney and Warner tried buying some of them so that way they could sort of dip their hand in the cookie jar of independent content. But it wasn't really independent at that point. It was a lot similar to what they were already doing with the old system. People got tied up in contracts where you could only distribute it through their channels, and they had the rights to names and characters and all this sort of thing. Now, people can crowdfund successful cartoons, entire series. The most recent one I can think of is Monster Lab by Meat Canyon, and it's, regardless of what you think about that, because I know Meat Canyon tends to be a little bit edgy and more adult, but I watched the show and I was impressed by it. He did that whole series through crowdfunding, and it's beautiful and it's brilliant. And he didn't have to go through a network. I don't know if he was thinking about pitching it around to a network or not, but he didn't have to go through a network, and it was crazy. This is the type of thing that years ago would have been totally impossible. You know, but he might have been able to do a Flash thing, but it would have taken years. And he was able to do this and do it through YouTube. He didn't have to go through Warner or Paramount or Disney or Universal or anybody else. Or MGM or Columbia or who. Insert famous Hollywood studio of the past 100 years here. And it's nuts. It's absolutely nuts. It's so cool to see independent content creation flourish, but you gotta think Hollywood is scared. Because, like I was saying before, they tried to buy out many of these MCNs, but ultimately it ended up failing because what they wanted to do was implement the old system with this new thing, and it didn't work because people started exposing these contracts and saying, don't sign them, which you shouldn't, and it just sort of was like a Jenga tower, just kind of tipped over when it was at its peak, and that's why that sort of thing hasn't really come back. And it's one of the reasons why multi-channel networks aren't popular anymore, is because they don't have the sway, number one, that they used to with YouTube, but number two, they start launching their own channels and acting like Hollywood, where they have the rights to everything you do and everything you distribute under them. So those days are over. Now is the time of the independently crowdfunded content creator. And Hollywood, you know, in the past, Hollywood's draw was both exposure and funding, especially for live action stuff. If you wanted to pitch a sitcom, for instance, you go to Disney, go to Warner, go to Paramount, go to Columbia, go to Universal, go to whoever would had the, you know, the back lots and the sound stages and the cameras and the set building and all of the resources to be able to produce something of that quality. You had to go through that whole system. Now you don't. I mean, if you've got a fair amount of money, you can crowdfund to be able to even use these facilities through other companies. Because there are other companies that have sprung up since then who have these resources outside of Hollywood. And it all makes me think, what are these companies going to do? And I've got a couple of theories. My first theory is, well, for one, right now, they're more focused on putting all of their eggs in the streaming basket, which I think is a horrible mistake. They've got networks still, but what they're doing with the networks is they're using them as a vehicle to push people to streaming. They're sort of dual broadcasting some shows on the network and some shows on streaming, but then they're advertising stuff that's just on streaming repeatedly. You know, it's been a long time since I've sat down and watched network television, you know, on cable, which is what I still have. And I watched it recently, and it was a totally unrecognizable thing. It was a shell of its former self. It felt like more ads than programming, and the programming blocks themselves on, like, the old three family networks, Disney, Nickelodeon, and Cartoon Network. All of the programming was just what was considered the most popular, and then the second most popular, and then they would rotate between the hours between those two programs. Maybe there would be a third one in there, but by the time the broadcast schedule of the day is done and they get to the nighttime adult programming, it's you know, there's not much of a variety. It's the same stuff. It's even more repetitive than it was when I stopped watching TV. And I stopped watching because of how repetitive it was. There used to be joking that Nickelodeon should have renamed itself to the SpongeBob Network because it was their most popular show, and they had so much to broadcast throughout the day. They could fill their entire day with SpongeBob, and they've done that recently with marathons and things. But now it's SpongeBob, The Loud House, which I'm not a big fan of. Some other things in between that I don't really recognize. Nickelodeon's completely unrecognizable to me. I'm like, what is this? This isn't Nickelodeon. This is, the only recognizable thing is SpongeBob. It's the only thing I feel comfortable watching. Loud House is not great to me. I know plenty of people don't share that opinion, but hey, look at me. I'm 30. This stuff is past me. SpongeBob is the only thing that's recognizable. But some of the other stuff, I don't recognize at all. Cartoon Network, they were running, Scooby-Doo, and I think it's called Scooby-Doo and Guess Who, which is another new Scooby-Doo show, which is miles better than Velma ever will be. I mean, it was done in the classic Scooby-Doo Where Are You style, but the gimmick was that they had guest stars, which is something that they had done with some of the movies, and I think they did another show where it was celebrity guest stars, but I guess they're doing it again, but they're making it styled like Where Are You? And I really like it. I really liked it. They had one of the guys from Run DMC on the episode that I saw, and I didn't even see the full thing, but I thought, man, this is animated beautifully. It looks straight out of Hanna-Barbera 1950s, 1960s, specifically 1960s. I think that's when Scooby-Doo was a big thing. But it looked just like Scooby-Doo Where Are You in a modernized form, which they've avoided doing for so long. The other closest one to that was What's New Scooby-Doo. I think that's my personal favorite modern iteration. I'm getting completely lost in the weeds here, though. The Hollywood studio system. Ultimately, they've got streaming, and then they've got television. Television is dying, and they know it. Oh, trust me, I'm sure they are well aware, they know it. So what they're doing with network television and what's left of it is they're using it as a vehicle to push people to streaming, because they'll broadcast some shows on both streaming and network television, but then they will repeatedly advertise stream-only shows on the networks and try to push people to those. And I gotta say, I don't think it's working. I don't think it's working. If somebody is not gotten streaming and is just using TV because it's what they know and they're fine with it, it's not working. Cable's already terribly expensive, and I don't know what satellite prices are, but cable's always been expensive, and the infrastructure it's absurd. So people keep saying that cable TV is going to die, and it's already dying because I don't use it. It's like, look, I don't use it either. I have it, but I don't use it. I use it every once in a while. The only thing it's useful for is live news, live sports, and occasionally, I don't know, you can find most programming, I think, on streaming now or through other means, but it's got its usefulness still, and as far as live stuff is concerned, it'll always be useful. But the question is Hollywood going to start shuttering the networks in favor of streaming? And the answer is, I think it's 50-50. I think if they realize that streaming, if they're really putting their eggs in the streaming basket, then they're gonna cut their losses with TV and just cut everything. Now, they've still got all sorts of ratings and money coming in through advertising revenues and all these deals with ad companies, so eventually streaming is going to become like TV as far as ads are concerned, which is really, I'm sorry, if I'm paying for a streaming service, I don't want ads. Especially if I'm going to be paying a high premium for a streaming service. One of the draws of something original like Netflix was that you were paying so you didn't get ads for a lot of this programming, and it was a la carte one-stop shop. They completely dropped the ball with that. I remember when Netflix came out, I never got it. I think I did the DVD service once. No, I don't think I actually did. Maybe we did it once. No, I think we still were Blockbuster loyal, and they had a similar program. It'd be interesting to see if Dish does anything with the Blockbuster brand, if they make a streaming service. I probably would check that out if they got rights to enough stuff, but the problem is the networks all want to hold on to the rights to their own properties and distribute it themselves through their own streaming services. And I think ultimately what they're going to realize is that that's costly. They have to pay for the servers and all of that, and they're going to be like, yeah, we don't want to really do this. Especially if we're not getting a lot of audience retention and people aren't willing to pay for it because of, economic struggles. So I don't know that streaming is the success that they think it is. Maybe somebody's got numbers to completely prove me wrong, and by all means do so if you do. I just don't see them putting all the eggs in that basket being particularly smart, at least in the way that it exists now. And if it's going towards a more ad-based thing, then I think they're going to have to start lowering prices for it or just making it free. That's one of the benefits of something like Pluto TV, which I think is really awesome, and I think they'd be smart to do kind of like what Nickelodeon does. They have slots of shows, of older shows, that they have broadcasting on this thing live, and it runs like kind of like an old style TV network, but it's all made up with ad revenue, and I think that's great. I think that's really great. And the amount of commercials really aren't as many as you see on regular network television. So I think that that's the way forward. But they're dead set on this subscription streaming model. And because they're dead set on this subscription streaming model, it's hard to say what they're going to be willing to do in the future. But I think that this is just the easiest way that they found, because I don't know who said it, but I completely agree with the trend that Hollywood is at least 5 to 6 years behind the curve when it comes to things like internet culture and what is popular through media outside of themselves and catching up with that. And I think that that's absolutely true. So I think what they're doing now is they're just now catching up to what Netflix used to be and trying to be that. The problem is Netflix is failing because they take what decent original programming they have and they get rid of it, and then they're trying to up the price, limit who can watch their program. They're just making all sorts of stupid decisions. What they should have done, and I'm not saying they didn't do this because I'm not privy to all of the inside knowledge of what goes on in negotiations with networks and rights to shows and things, they should have fought tooth and nail to keep what they had. They had shows from everywhere. They should have fought for that hard. But the reality is that either way, they ended up losing that, and the network started taking their shows back and putting them on their own things. But you're ending up in a situation that's just like what you've got with cable. You want to have Disney, Cartoon Network, and Nickelodeon. You've got to pay for Disney Plus, Paramount Plus, and HBO Max. And I think all three of those together, I haven't even checked the rates, but I know Paramount is at least, I think their cheapest is like $10 a month. But some of these are pretty high. Some of these are double digits a month. So you end up paying very close to, if some cases not more, than certain cable prices based on what tier of cable or satellite that you have. And you're right back to square one. And that's fine for them because that means just as much revenue as you might get through cable. Even though I don't think that they see the revenue that you pay for your cable bill. I think all of their money comes from, just advertisement and all that. But people end up back to square one. The whole. I remember it must have been at least 2015, 2016, maybe earlier than that, sometime in the 2010s, where there were all sorts of YouTube videos talking about you need to cut the cord and go to streaming. And this was at the time when there were only like 3 or 4 streaming services. There was Netflix, there was Hulu, and I don't know who else, but there were different streaming services. And they were like, you need to cut the cord, you need to do this because this is the future of where everything is going. And I was like, I don't know. The TV still got a lot of programming at that time, and YouTube is definitely looking like it's going to be the thing. I don't know. But at the end of the day, I think that there are ways that they can overcome their obsolescence. Not that I necessarily want them to. I want to be very clear about something. I love cartoons. I love animation. I really do. I've loved it ever since I was a child. If you ask me, I'd like to be a part of the animation industry in some way, shape, or form, although less so now because I'm a jaded 30-year-old adult who knows the truth about these things. But I love the history of television and movies. I'm not as big of a movie fan as some people. I grew up watching a lot of them, and a lot of them I liked, a lot of them I didn't like, but I was never a movie guy overall, aside from very specific franchises like old Star Wars and, that sort of thing. That's probably my favorite movie series of all time, but I'm not a big movie guy. And then TV was hit or miss, depending on what it was. I liked a lot of the live-action sitcoms, but some of them were hit or miss. But aside from that, and documentaries and stuff that really felt worth my time and didn't just feel like a waste of time, I never got into the reality show. I never understood the reality show craze. Apparently, that's still a thing, and I don't know where they're getting their audience. It must be a captive audience somewhere. I don't know, but I was never into TV and movies the way that some people were outside of animation. Animation was what kept drawing me back as a kid. It was always what cartoon show is on, as opposed to what live action show is on. I watched live action shows, but I just wasn't into them as much. But my point being, I don't know what my point was. I completely lost my point there. I think my point being is that at the end of the day, Hollywood is a dated model that's trying to embrace the future, or what they believe to be the future. They're ignoring independent content creation because they can't control it. They can only get people in contracts. The only allure is the money. And a lot of creators, not all of them, a lot of them sell out, but a lot of creators want to retain the rights to what they make because they put a lot of work into what they make. And the closest they'll do is maybe full creative control, but they still want to own the characters, the name, the locations, all of that. They still want ownership of something so that they can do whatever they want with it in the future, and then when you're dead, dance on your grave with it and defile it and whatever. They want the ability to be able to do that. But most people aren't willing to do that, because if they create something good, they want it to stay good, and they want it to be able to pass it to people who they can trust, and you can't really trust the Hollywood system. And yes, I do believe, as much as I'm getting back to my original point, as much as I was somewhat of a fan of TV and movies, not as much as other people, and animation, I realize that Hollywood is an evil place. There is no getting around it. All the glitz and the glamour, and I've been watching a lot of behind the scenes of things and backstage tours and stuff, and I'm like, oh, this looks like it'd be fun to work in. It's not real, guys. It's really not real. I had a friend who wanted to be an actress, and I just told her, and I think she's still doing maybe some theater stuff, I'm not sure, but the reality is, it is a dark industry. I mean, you've got the obvious stuff like the casting couch and the contracts, but then you've got the subtleties of how directors treat actors, how actors treat staff, how everybody working to make something treat one another, and how they manipulate each other and screw each other over. And it's a whole mess, because it's a big business with billions of dollars floating around. So obviously people are going to be very cutthroat, and it's going to be very nasty. So in part, I hope that Hollywood doesn't adapt, because it's going to be as corrupt and as money grubbing as ever. You know? I mean, and it's been this way for well over 100 years in various states. You know? There are examples of better Hollywood productions than others where you didn't have to deal with a lot of the corruption, but it's always been there. And there's always been certain circles of Hollywood that have been more corrupt than others. All you have to do is look at anybody who's gotten out of that and has been very outspoken about the industry. You know, and they always refer to it as the industry, and that should tell you something. It is an industry. You know, it is a, in some cases, quite literally a sweatshop industry, especially when it comes to animation, having stuff sent overseas. I don't think many people would like the conditions under which many people animate overseas. I don't think it's very, very good. But there's a reason it's like that, and you can thank a lot of the animators in the earlier days for not wanting to do a lot of work. And to be fair, they weren't working in the best conditions, but Hollywood's solution was very shady. So it is what it is. But ultimately, I do hope that Hollywood comes out of its weird state. It sheds off a lot of its corruption, and I don't think it's going to. Ultimately, there's just too much money, and there's too much allure of power, and I think there's too many people that can be easily manipulated into selling their life away. It's the same as the music industry. You sell their souls, and the record industry is going through the exact same problem of obsolescence with the internet. I mean, they both haven't adapted to the future of content delivery and of independent content creators. They're trying desperately to try and somehow buy out content creators, but it's not, for the most part, it's not working. And crowdfunding is most assuredly part of the reason why they're not able to manipulate people as much, because through crowdfunding, people are seeing budgets that were only possible through Hollywood. So, I mean, it is what it is. Especially animation's probably the best one for crowdfunding, and things like comic books and, you know, that sort of thing. But, yeah, hopefully the independent content creator just renders Hollywood completely obsolete. Now, obviously, Hollywood is not going to go away, because the resources that they have are still the best you can get. They've got backlots. They've got sound stages. They've got cameras that you can't even dream to afford. They've got all sorts of people and, like I said, facilities just being redundant at this point. It's just, they have that infrastructure built in. And as long as they have that, people are at the very minimum going to be paying them to use it. So that stuff's not going away. What is changing is that it's not all centralized around Hollywood, California anymore. There's a lot of stuff going on in Texas, in Georgia. There are people who are looking to branch out, but it's still the old system. If they can't get over the old system and adapt it to the current atmosphere and adjust to the overflowing independence of creators without trying to buy it out wholesale, if they could promote independent creation, that'd be great. You know, say that they work out a deal in terms of a revenue split, as opposed to having people, as opposed to just buying out people's work, they do some sort of revenue split that ends up being fair and beneficial. I don't know how that would work, but I think that that's what they need to do going forward. I think another thing they need to do is focus on telling good stories again. You know, I've mentioned that this year, as of the recording of this video, 2023, is WB and Disney's 100th anniversary. I saw WB's presentation, their trailer, narrated by Morgan Freeman. I thought it was pretty good, but it put Casablanca in with Batwoman. The amount of difference of quality is staggering. Casablanca, whether you love it or hate it, is a timeless classic, considered one of the best movies of all time. Batwoman is a TV show that was riddled with all sorts of problems and controversies and is just uber political. The disparity between the two. They were showing a highlight of what they thought were the greatest, and some absolute genius at Warner Brothers was like, let's put in a clip of Batwoman. Let's put in a clip of the upcoming Flash movie that nobody wants because Ezra Miller is just terrible. Let's put in clips of Big Bang Theory. You know, that show that everybody loves. And I know some people loved it genuinely, but the general consensus is that it's not great. It was a cultural phenomenon. I guess that's fair to put it in there. I think it would be kind of weird not to. But they had stuff like Lord of the Rings, Harry Potter, I forget what else. They just had a whole slate of their movies over the course of that 100-year period that were just brilliant. They didn't have too much of the black and white stuff outside of Casablanca, but they had a whole bunch of slate of stuff. My point being is that they need to, and this goes to all of Hollywood, not just Warner, because I've got a video on Warner Brothers' 100th anniversary that I will be releasing at some point. I just haven't decided when. They need to get back to telling stories. They need to start letting creators tell the stories they want to create, but they also need to make sure that those stories are not alienating general audiences, that they're not leaning too politically one way or the other, that they're not trying to overtly tie everything back to real-world geopolitical or socially political situations. They need to just tell stories that are good stories that stand on their own and that aren't dated by the politics of their time. Because that just doesn't work. They need to do that, and they need to have more quality control that's decent, not overbearing quality control where somebody in the studio just doesn't get what's happening, even though that this is something that's, the director is doing something that's popular and that people like, but the studio head just doesn't understand it. You know, they need quality control where they've got people who are understanding trends and are able to interpret that right and able to greenlight things that are good. Because right now it seems like quality control is all over the freaking place. I mean, we've got Velma, for crying out loud. That I don't know what's going on at Warner Brothers. I don't know what's in the coffee or the water there, but it's obviously not good for the brain. So hopefully they can get it all figured out. But I just wanted to ponder that with you all, and feel free to discuss it amongst yourselves and with myself in the comments. I'll be sure to read stuff for sure. Let me know what you think about Hollywood's system and its own obsolescence. Do you think that it has a future of being on top still, or do you think it's going to be dethroned by independent content? Do you think that they're going to try to adapt to independent content? Are they going to just keep trying to buy people out with contracts? Are they going to try to do something different that's more fair and allows for more independence? Like, what are they going to do? What do you think they're going to do? Let me know in the comments down below, and I will see you guys in the next video. This has been Super Koopa. God bless. Have a good one. Peace.